You're not a positive culture fit, Graham. Your attitude just drags the team down. You don't smile enough." Those were the exact words Derek Sullivan used to end my 12-year career at Hamilton Properties. He didn't even look up from his phone as he said it. Just kept scrolling through his Instagram feed, pausing occasionally to like photos of his wife's overpriced fashion blog. "My name is Graham Pierce. I'm 43 years old, and until that morning, I was the head of property acquisitions for Hamilton Properties, a mid-sized real estate firm in downtown Seattle. I had built my department from scratch, taking it from a 2-person operation to a 20-person powerhouse that brought in over 60% of the company's annual revenue. But none of that mattered to Derek, our newly appointed CEO, brought in by the board to modernize and energize the company after the founder's retirement. Derek Sullivan was 31, had an MBA from Wharton that his father had paid for, and carried himself with the unearned confidence of someone who had never actually built anything. He wore designer suits that cost more than my first car, drove a Tesla he couldn't explain the technology behind, and insisted everyone call team meetings synergy sessions. He'd been CEO for all of 3 months, and in that time, he'd managed to alienate half the senior staff with his constant reorganizations and culture initiatives. The warning signs had been there from the start. In his first week, Derek had implemented a smile score system where employees rated each other's positivity. He installed mood-tracking software on our computers that monitored our facial expressions during video calls. He replaced our coffee machine with a juice bar because caffeine creates anxiety and anxiety kills creativity. But what Derek really wanted was to surround himself with yes men, people who would laugh at his jokes, validate his decisions, and never challenge his authority. I wasn't that person. I questioned his proposed acquisition strategies when they didn't make sense. I pointed out market risks when he wanted to rush into deals. I didn't participate in his mandatory morning motivation circles, where we were supposed to share our gratitude moments before discussing actual business. The breaking point came during a client meeting last week. Derek had promised a potential investor we could deliver a 40% return on a property portfolio that my analysis showed would yield 15% at best. When I quietly corrected him with the actual figures, his smile never wavered, but his eyes went cold. The investor thanked me for my honesty. Derek never forgave me for it. That morning, he'd called me into his office at 8:15 a.m. before I'd even had my coffee. The sun was streaming through his floor-to-ceiling windows, highlighting the minimalist decor he'd installed at company expense. Everything was white or chrome, sterile and characterless, much like Derek himself. "This isn't about numbers," he'd said dismissively when I pointed out my department's performance. "It's about attitude, culture. You're just not positive enough." I didn't argue, didn't defend myself, didn't point out that my negativity had saved the company millions and avoided bad investments. I simply nodded, turned around, and walked out of his office. Melissa from HR was waiting outside with a box and a security guard. "We'll need your laptop, phone, and access cards," she said, not meeting my eyes. "You have 1 hour to clear your desk." As I packed my personal belongings, my mind raced. Something about this felt wrong, beyond the obvious injustice of it. Derek's haste to get me out of the building, the security guard hovering nearby, Melissa's nervous energy. It felt like more than just a termination. It felt like a cover-up. "I'll need to do a proper handover of my files," I told Melissa. "There are ongoing negotiations that—" "Mr. Sullivan will handle all transitions personally," she interrupted. "Please focus on gathering your personal items." That's when I knew something was definitely wrong. Derek had never shown interest in the detailed work of acquisitions. He wouldn't know a cap rate from a carnival rate. I sat at my desk one last time, logged into my computer, and began the process of transferring my files to the shared drive as requested. That's when I noticed something odd. A folder in the system I'd never seen before, titled DS Private, Executive Only. It hadn't been there yesterday. Normally, I wouldn't have looked, but given the circumstances of my termination, curiosity got the better of me. I clicked on it, What I found made my blood run cold. The folder contained dozens of documents, invoices, wire transfers, and emails. At first glance, they looked like standard property acquisitions. But the amounts were wrong. Properties we'd purchased for $2 million showed receipts for $2.5 million. The extra money was being funneled to a company called Motivate Consulting LLC, which, according to the Washington Secretary of State website, was registered to Derek Sullivan's wife. I kept digging, my heart pounding. Over the past 3 months, more than $3 million had been siphoned from Hamilton Properties through inflated invoices and fake consulting fees. Derek wasn't modernizing the company, he was robbing it blind. But that wasn't all. In a subfolder labeled Termination Strategy, I found something that made my termination suddenly make sense. Emails between Derek and his personal attorney discussing how to remove obstacles to his plans. My name was at the top of the list, along with Janet from accounting and Paul from legal, the 3 people most likely to spot financial irregularities. One email was particularly damning. Graham's employment contract has that unusual audit clause. Need to terminate before Q3 review triggers it. Use the culture fit angle. Impossible to prove otherwise. I sat back, stunned. The audit clause, I'd almost forgotten about it. When I'd renegotiated my contract 5 years ago, I'd insisted on a clause that gave me the right to request an independent audit if I suspected financial misconduct. The company had agreed, thinking it would never be used. But the clause also stated that if I was terminated without cause within 60 days of requesting such an audit, I'd be entitled to 2-year severance plus stock options. Derek must have discovered this during his review of senior staff contracts. He was trying to fire me before I could invoke the clause. I quickly forwarded key documents to my personal email, took screenshots, and downloaded what I could onto a USB drive I kept in my desk. The security guard was getting antsy, checking his watch. 5 more minutes, I told him, my voice steady despite my racing pulse. I finished gathering evidence and pulled up my employment contract. There, in Section 7.3, was the audit clause. I drafted a quick email to the board of directors. Per Section 7.3 of my employment contract, I hereby formally request an independent financial audit of Hamilton Properties, focusing on all transactions initiated since Mr. Sullivan's appointment as CEO. I have reason to believe there are significant irregularities that require immediate investigation. I hit send, then logged out and handed over my laptop. All done? The security guard asked. Yes, I said, picking up my box. All done. As I walked to my car, my personal phone buzzed. It was already starting. The first response was from Margaret Chen, the board chair. Graham, please call me immediately. Instead of calling, I drove straight to the Seattle FBI field office. Special Agent Maria Rodriguez listened intently as I laid out what I'd found. She asked detailed questions about our company's financial procedures, about Derek's access to accounts, about the timeline of his hiring and the suspicious transactions. You did the right thing coming to us immediately, she said. This appears to be a clear case of embezzlement and fraud. We'll need to verify everything, but if what you're showing us is accurate, Mr. Sullivan is in serious trouble. There's more, I said, explaining about the audit clause in my contract and the timing of my termination. Agent Rodriguez's eyebrows rose. So he fired you specifically to prevent you from triggering an audit? That's conspiracy to defraud, obstruction. This keeps getting better. The next 72 hours were a whirlwind. The FBI moved quickly but quietly. They obtained warrants, froze accounts, and began forensic accounting. Meanwhile, the board of directors was in chaos. My audit request, sent minutes before my termination, had triggered a legal requirement they couldn't ignore. Derek tried to do damage control. He sent a company-wide email claiming my termination was performance-based and that my audit request was retaliation from a disgruntled employee. But the board had already hired an independent firm to investigate. By Thursday morning, 4 days after my termination, Derek's world came crashing down. FBI agents arrested him at his Bellevue mansion at 6 a.m. They seized his computers, phones, and financial records. Local news crews, tipped off by someone, I still don't know who, captured footage of Derek being led away in handcuffs, his perfect smile finally gone. The details that emerged were staggering. Derek had been running his embezzlement scheme from day one. His hiring hadn't been random. He'd targeted Hamilton Properties specifically because our aging founder had been eager to hire someone young and dynamic. He'd used his charm and fake positivity as cover for his true intentions. The motivational speakers he'd hired, they were shell companies owned by his relatives. The team-building retreats, held at resorts owned by his college friends with massive kickbacks. The office renovations, contracted to firms that existed only on paper. Even the juice bar was a front, owned by his brother-in-law and billing us 5 times the market rate for organic kale smoothies. In total, Derek had stolen nearly $5 million in just 3 months. He'd planned to strip the company of assets and disappear before anyone noticed, leaving Hamilton Properties bankrupt and its employees jobless. By noon, Hamilton's board had issued a statement. They were shocked and dismayed by the allegations. They promised full cooperation with authorities and a complete audit of company finances. Derek was terminated, effective immediately. But the real vindication came that afternoon. Margaret Chen called an emergency board meeting and asked me to attend. I walked into the boardroom. The same room where Derek had pitched his vision just months ago, to find all 12 directors present. Some looked shell-shocked, others looked angry. Margaret looked determined. "Graham," she began, "we owe you an apology. A profound apology. Your diligence and integrity have saved this company." "I was just doing my job," I replied. "No," she said firmly. "You did far more than that. Even as you were being unjustly terminated, you thought of the company first. You triggered the audit clause, knowing it would protect Hamilton Properties even if it couldn't protect your job." She slid a document across the table. "We've reviewed your termination. Given the circumstances and the clear evidence that Derek fired you to cover up his crimes, we're declaring your termination null and void. You never stopped being an employee of Hamilton Properties." I looked at the document. It was a new contract. "Furthermore," Margaret continued, "the board unanimously agrees that we need someone with your integrity in a more senior position. We're offering you the role of Chief Operating Officer with a seat on the board of directors." I read through the contract carefully. Old habits die hard. The salary was triple what I'd been making. The stock options were generous. But what caught my eye was a new clause. The company commits to maintaining the highest standards of financial transparency and ethical conduct. "There's one more thing," Margaret added. "Per your original contract's audit clause, since you were terminated without cause within 60 days of requesting an audit, you're entitled to 2 years severance. We'll be honoring that, even though your termination has been reversed. Consider it inadequate compensation for what you've been through." I signed the contract. 2 months later, I sat in my new office. Not Derek's chrome and white monstrosity, but a comfortable space with warm wood furniture and pictures of Seattle's skyline. As COO, I had implemented rigorous financial controls, whistleblower protections, and eliminated every trace of Derek's toxic positivity culture. The FBI investigation had expanded. They discovered Derek had run similar schemes at 2 previous companies, each time escaping just before detection. He now faced 25 to 30 years in federal prison for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. His wife was charged as an accomplice. The shell companies were being unwound, and we were recovering most of the stolen funds. During his trial, Derek's lawyer tried to argue that his client was a visionary leader who had been unfairly targeted by resistant employees. The jury didn't buy it. When the prosecutor presented my evidence, the documents I'd found, the emails about terminating me to avoid the audit, Derek's facade finally cracked completely. He broke down on the stand, admitting everything. The irony wasn't lost on me. Derek had fired me for not being positive enough, for asking too many questions, for being too serious about my work. But it was precisely those qualities that had led me to uncover his scheme. He thought my diligence was a weakness to be eliminated. Instead, it became the weapon that destroyed him. These days, I smile plenty at work. Not because anyone demands it, but because I'm proud of what we've rebuilt. Hamilton Properties is stronger than ever, with a culture that values integrity over image, substance over style. At new employee orientations, I share the story of Derek Sullivan. Not to gloat, but to illustrate a crucial point. In business, authentic leadership beats artificial enthusiasm every time. Real positivity comes from doing good work with good people, not from mandatory smile scores and motivation circles. Derek wanted me gone because I didn't smile enough. In the end, he's the one who lost everything: his job, his freedom, his carefully crafted image. And that's something worth smiling about. As for the audit clause that saved everything, it's now standard in every senior management contract at Hamilton Properties. Because sometimes, the best protection against those who demand blind positivity is a healthy dose of skepticism and a good lawyer.